Okay, Anthony, hello. Thanks for joining me. Whereabouts in the world are you?
I am in Nairobi, Kenya.
Cool. Okay, and tell me about your role right now. I understand you've been involved in setting up something pretty big. Let's hear about that first before we get into the coronavirus stuff.
Awesome. So late last year, we had this really cool idea with one of my mentors, Graham Ohanga, and the idea was that we'd seen the African developer ecosystem get fragmented so much. There are not that many developers, so attention is being drawn in so many areas. Yet no one's speaking in one voice. Like, hey devs, this is the stack you need to be able to learn. These are the tools you need, and this is how you build stuff. And that's what we decided to. We came up with the idea of Decoded Africa that kind of like cemented that. Over time, it's evolved into so many different things. But at the same time, the core of it has always been our developer communities. How do we provide infrastructure, tools, and training for them? So we set up our first space in Nairobi, a former Africa Stocking headquarters. So we converted it into a meetup space basically, and we've been supporting communities for the past now 4 months. And as you can imagine, our business also took a massive hit simply because of this corona situation. But the goal of it was to basically, as time went by, we realized really the need that we were trying to solve was that startups and companies always complain that they can't find talent, and developers always say they can't find work. So can we create this physical manifestation of both their desires and bring them together? And we've seen like some really fantastic results, and a lot of learnings from it as well. Just realizing how the missing pieces for businesses, and the missing pieces for developers. So for the developers, a bit of professionalism, just being professional with their work, and then for the business side, like being open to the idea of building custom software, and actually solving their customers' needs. So yeah, it's been a pretty fun journey so far.
Great, great. So how can people find out more about that?
So you can find us at our website decoded.africa, and you can also find us on Twitter decoded_Africa. Yeah, and you can reach out to any of the founders. So we are actually 8 guys who came together to build this. And one of the ideas behind it was that it's really expensive to hire talent right now, especially in the fields that we were looking at. But right now, but by having founders with very specific uh, skills and tool sets, it allows us to kind of like create this very unique company that may not need that many people hired, but at the same time, still is able to achieve its goal.
Okay, so tell me about the coronavirus situation in Kenya. How's it developed? Because I think understanding that is really crucial to understanding how developer communities have been affected and so on.
So in Kenya, so far it's been we've had about now 200 infections. Last time I checked, on Saturday, the exact figure was 186, and we've lost 9 people so far to corona. The government has taken drastic measures to kind of like curb this. So, for example, like we can't meet anymore. No one goes to work. Everyone has to either work from home. So that has definitely had a massive economic impact on our society, simply because we're also a very informal society in how we transact money. Um, so that has really affected our markets and all that. But at the same time, we've also seen a very interesting rise in business, especially for tech, for specific companies in the tech sector. The government has also implemented a couple of interesting things, including we are mass producing masks within the country. So that is being provided by the government everywhere. So if you walk around, everyone has their mask on. We're also watching malls change how when you walk into a mall, they're handing out masks, they're handing out um, gloves, and it's also interesting to see how quickly we've accepted social distancing as well. I thought Kenyans would have a big issue with that, but people are quite comfortable with the idea, and it's nice to see that togetherness in trying to prevent the COVID from actually causing too much damage to our society.
Well, actually, let's dive into developer communities a bit and how, you're heading up, or what, one of the founders of Decoded Africa. So let's talk a bit about, for people who aren't from Africa, about how developer communities work in Africa. And I know that I'm talking about a continent of many people in different countries, but you have Decoded Africa as something targeting the continent. So can you take me through some of the bits that might be different from how things work in the Bay Area in California or Western Europe, for example?
Hmm. I think developer communities here still have a very strong base in universities. And the reason behind this is that there are not that many professional developers. Statistically, about 60% of developers are basically students, still in school. And we're watching a lot of them struggle right now simply because the school environment provided so much for them, the space infrastructure, the ability to meet all these other people. But now the community is kind of hurting, but I can still see growth happening online. Now, it's hard to predict what this will do generally to the developer community here in Africa, because apart from the universities, we've also seen a lot of them revolve around specific big tech companies, so Microsoft, Google, especially. Um, Now, support from Google and all these guys often used to come through monetary support for events. Now it's kind of changing how that model should work, and that is really, it's something rare to see how to kind of deal with. We're noticing a lot more webinars happen to try and like keep people up to date with what's going on. But still, there's a challenge of internet, for example, in Africa. Kenya is very lucky. Kenya, I mean, there's 4G across the country. The president announced they're working with Google to fly out internet weather balloons across the country just to make sure everyone's connected. But in many other African countries, that's not simply not possible. And you notice a drop off in developer activity online. People now they no longer have the universities and all these communal spaces where they could access the internet. So that's kind of shifting the dynamics of how we are looking at approaching things, um, which is something I guess in the next couple of months we'll be able to figure out what would happen. We bank a lot on Africa's talking technology, which is heavily based on offline access. So we built up this tech stack at Africa Talking where you can access information via SMS, via voice, via USSD, and a couple of other technologies. So what we're trying to see is this student Africa Talking side, trying to see if this is possibly a way of us being able to help the African continent still remain have access to online to the internet and information while still being able not being spending so much money on data and probably having to upgrade your phone just to be able to like watch webinars. So yeah, we're still in that space where we're kind of trying to like piece this Rubik's cube together, because even getting information out of particular countries is already really hard. But we're working with what we have for now. Yeah.
It doesn't sound a million miles different from what's happening elsewhere. Switching to webinars. I think other than you're mentioning an offline first approach and trying to get around certain infrastructure difficulties, perhaps, particularly in Kenya. Then, would you say that the interaction between developers and companies, other than the model you mentioned with the universities, but would you say it's often a case of people like Africa's Talking who are looking to sell an API to developers, or is it more of a like an open source communities coming together? What tends to be the main model?
I think right now it's more of API companies winning. We haven't seen a large like so much activity on the open source side, and I genuinely think that is also because of what we call what me and my workmates call the lack of surplus talent. So there's not enough talent on the continent to just for someone just be sitting down and coming up with all these random things. We have seen that happen a couple of instances, but in regards to like a mass scale of adoption and contribution to open source, that we haven't seen that much. However, in regards to API consumption, that is, in fact, right now, the best place to be starting an API business is in Africa. There's so much that hasn't been built out yet. There's a lot of infrastructure, base infrastructure that hasn't been built out yet. Yet, when we start looking at the companies that do have APIs and are reaching out to developers, they're doing really well. So Safaricom, for example, with their M-Pesa APIs, they're doing extremely well right now.
And that's a payment system.
Yeah, that's a payment system.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing is that people are the government has this directive where we ought to go cashless completely, no cash whatsoever. So that has forced developers to start integrating M-Pesa into all this all payments basically into the applications. So that has driven that up. Then there's also the question of the last mile delivery services. How do you get things from a shop all the way to somebody's house? And that is being done by motorcycles. Now, motorcycles, we call them boda bodas. Really a couple of fun articles around that. And what that has done is that there's a company, for example, called Sandy that offers an API that allows you to integrate their services into their app, and you can actually make deliveries of your products to your customers quite seamlessly. Same thing, we're just watching so many so many companies release APIs now because they're realizing, oh, for the first time, people have to be using stuff online, and the only way that can happen is if we have all the right building blocks and just the APIs. So for now, I think APIs will have a massive adoption for now, and then over time we'll start seeing open source become a lot more accepted in the developer community, simply because of that surplus talent that exists, that will now be existing. Yeah.
So if you were going to look forward to say 6 months, a year from now, can you imagine that things might be different as a result of coronavirus, or is it too early to tell? Because here in the UK, and if I look at what's happening in the US and so on, think things are changing for now, but it's hard to make predictions obviously about what will happen in the future. But it seems like people are willing to do more online. Events are moving online. I mean, you and I have spoken in the past about a DevRel Con taking place in Nairobi. You got to wonder if things like that will ever happen again right now, because
True.
Things have changed so much. So what do you think might look different in a year's time in your tech scene?
Well, the way I kind of see things panning out, as you said, it's still super early to kind of like say what's going on. But taking different things into consideration, so Microsoft announcing that they're canceling all the events all the way to 2021, meaning that they're viewing something they've seen and they're like, okay, we need to manage this. And even looking at getting a vaccine for corona might take a bit of time, maybe a year from now or so. And within a year, I think there'll be significant enough changes for life to look a bit quite different. I mean, for the tech industry itself, I think we will see in Africa, especially, I believe we're going to see a large, a massive growth in regards to the number of developers. People have a lot more access. People have a lot more time to play around with these APIs. When you just think about like Nairobi is pretty big, and sometimes and right now I'm realizing how much time I used to waste on transit and commute, and now I have all this time back. So now I'm getting this incentive to learn a bit more, to do different things, to do all these things. We're watching. I generally see probably a couple of years from now, people will be working from home, and I think this maybe solidifies also the developer mentality of like work from a comfortable place and be in a space that actually allows you to be creative and actually solve problems. So that will kind of catch on over time. We'll also realize that maybe appreciate a bit more if we ever to have events again. Maybe there'd be a bit more insistence probably on the social aspect, the human aspect of what we are doing, compared to previously where it was, a whole 3 days of like running around. Sessions have to be done. We'll have to make any human to human interaction has to now become very meaningful, and you have to draw something out of it. And I see our events maybe changing slightly, but I'm not sure to what extent. Like, we only have like 100 people events from now on, or we be able to go back to the 3,000, 5,000 kind of people events. But especially for here in Kenya, I generally see just generally a massive growth in regards to the number of developers and the number of startups that also come out of this period. Also, I probably also see certain very specific cultural shifts, especially for in the African context, that will change how we've kind of like been viewing our place in the general tech society. Maybe this is a good thing as well, where the influence from because Africa's tech industry for a long time has been heavily influenced from the West. But now in the past couple of years, we've seen a lot more homegrown solutions, and what we are going to see is that happening a lot more, uniqueness and actual solutions that actually help people. Yeah,
That sounds great. But with that, bearing that in mind, though, I'm interested in asking you, what should non-Kenyan companies bear in mind if they want to work with developers in Kenya? Whether that's that they've got an API to sell or whatever it might be. What would you recommend? And what does someone need to know about the Kenyan developer scene?
yeah. So for any company coming into Kenya right now, certain things have to be very clear about the developer community here. It's still very young. There's still a lot of very young developers coming up. The talent is ridiculous sometimes. You get to meet really young developers in university pulling off some really ridiculous projects. Just really fun stuff to be able to see. So it's reaching developers here also requires you to have a particular appeal, and the appeal mostly is driven around how can I use this thing to help my people now or build a business now. It has to be like filtered down to that point. That's when you start seeing the usefulness of your product, and you can actually get proper feedback. Because on the other hand, you can have developers sign up on your platform and all they're doing is checking out, making a few demos and bouncing, which may not be as useful. You also, I guess from my experience so far, I think really well documented APIs. If you have APIs, I think that really shifts how people use your platform, and partnering with already existing players. African developers, especially Kenyan developers, are very so Truecaller, for example, launched a couple of APIs the other day, for the African markets, but adoption is generally pretty low, simply because for Kenyan developers, they're asking, why do we need this tool? We already have M-Pesa's solution, or we have this other solution that already works. But if you come together with, so we've seen a couple of companies band together, Safaricom and a couple of other companies banding together to do particular things, reaching developers. Same thing that after talking, we've also been thinking about how can we get partners together to sell particular APIs. Because at the end of the day, what you want to do is to fit yourself in the picture of the African context. Is not to impose your picture, but to fit yourself in the picture of how things work. So I guess for me, that would be kind of like the advice. Where do you fit in the puzzle? That's what really matters.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thanks. All right. Well, look, I hope you stay well. Hope you stay safe.
Same to you.
And thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, pleasure.